So I'm just going to use this trap here as an example. So when you're constructing something like this, there's a number of ways to go about it. You can either build all the components out of wood, MDF, that type of material, or you can do what this is a resin casting. So all the different bits and pieces of this have been cast. They've been molded up in a silicone mold from a master part and then cast so that we can make multiple copies. So to go the scratch build way, if you're just making a one-off, that's the way to go. It's the cheapest way to go. If you want to mass produce so that you have the group needs several of these, you would go with a resin casting. So which basically means that you're going to make a master part of each one of the components on this, and there's probably about 20-25 different pieces involved in this. So each one of these would have its own master part, its own mold. So you would then cast all the different resin pieces. A lot of the other features on this side plating is all laser cut aluminum parts. These are all real aluminum. These pieces, the knobs and things like that, are actually cast from a real part. Just made a copy of it. Real resistor. This vector plate is like a heat sink. That's another real part. All the hardware that we use on them is all Allen bolts from different hardware stores. Real roller bearing wheels, so the drive actually rolls.
The Allen bolts you may not be able to get at your local hardware store, but I guarantee you they are out there. For Fastco or online.
Another component here is this fitting, which is a Foster Quick Connect, which couples onto the hose here. So there's the female, the male connection. Of course, that goes on the trap. And then depending on how carried away you want to get with this, you can put electronics in it. There's different light kits out there. You can go as far as putting servos to make an opening trap. Some people line the inside with metal so they can make a smoking trap. I don't advise that indoors. Can it be done?
Certainly not if you have allergies.
So weight-wise, probably 6 to 8 pounds maybe.
Oh, nice. Yours?
Oh, that one's pretty good.
Yeah, that one's the heaviest.
I'm going to say it's about 5 pounds.
Yeah, I've got some traps that are a bit lighter.
Yeah, but certainly, I mean, 5 pounds relative to the nearly 10 pounds of this, right?
And of course, you can do things to light these up. Like a stunt trap where you didn't need to have opening doors, and you just had a flat piece here. You could hollow out some of the bits on the inside that aren't visible from the outside to cut down on weight.
It's one of those things that when you are making these, that you need to make the decision of how far do I want to go with this? And what do I practically want this for? Do I want this to hang from my belt and look good? Or do I want to go the whole 9 yards? Do I want the lights? Do I want the motion? Do I want the smoke? Do I want the sounds? How far am I planning to go with this? And it's something that a lot of people won't plan for originally, and when they start running into the decision that they have to make, that's what really catches them off guard. Because they'll be going, well, I thought it would be this, and now I want more. But with that, obviously comes more price, more cost.
So it's big time. It's a question of accuracy versus durability versus practicality versus budget. Like a lot of the stuff is expensive. If you're going to get into resin casting, mold making, all that, it's a big undertaking, and there's a lot of cost involved. So if you're just making one costume, it's not really economical to mold everything up yourself. You best just to buy parts from various places. Here's an example. Here's the original MT500 Motorola radio that was molded in silicone, and then this is a resin casting of. You feel the difference weight-wise. You would think that's a real radio. Not much difference. Whoa, yeah. Resin parts wear just the same as.
Yeah. And as for visual appeal, it looks almost identical, doesn't it?
Yeah. You know, side by side, you look at all the dials and screws and everything on it. The silicone picks up every little nuance. Obviously, this one wasn't the casting one because it has this label on it. If I was to cast this, it would pick up all this text, pick up this label, fingerprints. If you put a fingerprint in the paint before you mold it up, it's going to pick all that up. So there's the 2 pieces there. And that could also be made lighter if you wanted to. You could do hollow casting. It's just a more involved molding process. These are two slightly different radios. You get the idea?
Just the length, that's it.
I'm going to talk a little bit about the electronics now, which, again, can be, in some ways, can be a harder thing to do, a harder thing to put in, because a lot of people will have the ability to glue, screw, join things at home. Not everybody has the ability to solder or weld or to connect electronics, and God forbid something goes wrong, they may or may not know what to do about it. So to start this off, I'm going to use the Star Trek version, or Star Trek way of explaining things, and that is use a very, very simple analogy to explain a more complicated subject. So if you've ever heard talked about electronics, you are going to hear volts, you're going to hear amps, and you're going to hear ohms. These are the three things that you will need to really wrap your head around to start planning for electronics. Volts, to use my Star Trek analogy, would be the flood that cuts into a riverbed. It's the startup. It's something that begins and powers everything on. The amps are the river then flowing in that bed. They are the constant flow of electricity into the circuitry once you've started it up. The ohms is the beaver dam that then limits the river, that narrows it, that confines it. All right? Now using that, most people will use small batteries. 9 volts are very, very popular because they will give you a long battery life for what they cost, what they need. All right? But for something like the packs, you would need a lot of 9 volts to power a lot of these packs, especially if you want sound. Because if you want sound and you want a speaker that is going to be able to be heard, you're talking about using at least a simple amp. All right? Now, there are kits out there that will incorporate the light and the sound that you can almost just plug in. But a lot of guys who design electronics boards for this kind of like to show off how smart and clever they are by not going all the way and making it really simple for the end consumer. They want to get a little bit technical in it and make you do some of the work. Now, that can be a good thing because when you do it and it works well, it gives you a very good sense of accomplishment. Like, look at how awesome what I have just done is. But when you run into trouble, that's when you feel like you're drowning or frying, depending on how big a volt you're using. So I'm going to use this gizmo as my explanation and show a very simple bit of electronics with this, which is basically just flashing lights, which I guarantee you, it sounds stupid, but it's true. Everybody loves flashing lights. It doesn't matter what costume, for what, for anything, people love flashing lights. To do this was a very, very simple board that involved 2 resistors, which would give us ohms, 2 capacitors, which I'll have to come up with a different analogy for, and a lot of LEDs and some time, and some soldering. This is not an impossible project for a lot of people, but it is a project you need to plan ahead. And in the end, you get the flashing lights that everyone loves, and really shows off, unless you're in bright daylight. All right. Let's talk a little bit about finding original pieces. Because again, people love having the originals. People love to be able to go, look at this night vision goggles I got for my Ecto goggles. And they're real. They're the actual things that would have been used in filming at the time. But as I mentioned before, a lot of this stuff is starting to go out of fashion in the 80s. And they haven't become more easy to find since. For this, just up here, the original pieces were called Nixie tubes. And they're simple tubes that would have basic lights in them to give you to light up a calculator. Those are very hard to find these days. Mostly they come out of Russia because they're still finding storehouses in Russia with stuff from the 50s, from the 60s, from the 80s. And basically every now and again they'll come out with something and go, oh wow, we've got 1,000 of these now, and we'll sell these. Otherwise they get a little tricky to find. Another thing would probably be resistors. I mean, it's not always easy to find these exact make of resistors. And part of the problem is we know the exact make of resistors. We know exactly what they are supposed to be, and so for the purist, nothing else will do. I mean, obviously resin casting is a very, very good option to go if you don't care about the actual reality of it. But to get real ones,
Well, I have a supplier that I'm not revealing to anybody. It's a kind of a protected source, but most of the resistors on the pack itself aren't that hard to find, but at times can be. It just depends on, like you say, a store or a cache of them have been found. There's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of resistors out there. They might have a different profile to them.
light,
With,
length.
yeah, with these parts, like with any movie prop, if you're going for accuracy, you're going to look for a specific type of resistor with a specific pattern, a specific value. People kind of get carried away sometimes, where you can get alternatives that are very close to it, but may have a different resistance to them. Not a big deal, because you're not actually putting power through it. It's more for the aesthetic look of it. Like this CalR trap resistor here, they're actually pretty abundant. I can get them for a buck. Some places you'll
From a
pay.
secret source.
Yes, some places you'll pay $5.
A good analogy for that is if you, and I'm sure we all do, know the lightsaber. And the original make of the lightsaber was from a flash camera, right? With the flash bit taken off. Well, to a camera enthusiast, that stick is worth $10 to $20. But to a Star Wars enthusiast, that same thing could be worth hundreds of dollars, right? To an electronics person, the resistor is $1, if that. They know what it's worth and what they can use it for, and practically what it will be used for in modern terms. But to the costumer, we'd be willing to pay a lot more, and therefore suddenly the price starts going up. Another good example is the clipper valves on the Proton pack. Those are still in manufacture, you can get them. They are probably still in manufacture partially because people will still pay for them. And I'm sure Clipper gets, every now and again, orders for the exact same one, and they go, okay, it's another Ghostbusters.
You are right.
Oh yeah.
I've actually talked
That happens
to
rather a lot, but people are always
I've
surprised.
actually talked to some people at Clipper, and they had certain colors of tubing that they've discontinued now that were on these packs. Can't get it anymore. So now people have had to go to other suppliers, so there you go, the accuracy's gone, right? For example, those flow control valves, they have not changed since they started. They've always been the same. There's another part on here, it's a brass fitting on here. Some of the newer ones are now actually starting to have printing put on them. So to the die-hard accuracy nut, you see the printing on there, well, that's not accurate anymore. It still does the same function, still looks the same, unless you get up really close. Like most people aren't going to scrutinize that closely at your stuff. These the night vision goggles, for example, the original military issue night frames that these are based from, you can't ship them. You can't buy them in the U.S. and have them shipped into Canada. They're limited. There was actually a guy just doing a run of frames that he'd gotten, and he's not able to ship them outside of the U.S. It's military hardware.
What about the actual condition of those frames that are in? Because these frames are being found, right? Because it's surplus, it's leftover stock that's in boxes.
It doesn't matter if it's broken or not, you still can't ship it.
You still can't ship them, but I'm like even finding the stuff. Like a lot of the things are in really poor condition that need a lot of work to cut back up to. Like some of the frames are snapped right in half and everything else.
Yeah, the original frames themselves were actually pretty fragile. Considering they're military hardware, they usually build stuff to last, but they would always break here at the nose piece. Those guys would just toss them back, and the thing they're done with it. You know, it's a pretty expensive piece of equipment. I think the military goggles, I would say, were probably several $1,000s.
At the time they were made easily.
So what we did with these is we made a resin cast from an original set. And now we can just reproduce them this way. Make all the lens pieces ourselves. And any of the other smaller parts are just from found bits and pieces. And straps made from the regular plastic with snap-on fittings and stuff.
Now,
Weight-wise, compared to the other ones, these pretty much feel like the real thing.
and And that actually leads into something that I'm going to start into the segue of the end of us doing a lot of talking with, and that is the rough rule of fives. Now you'll find this a lot, especially in reenactor circles, but it's something that could happen in just any costuming circle as well. And that is, if you have a flaw, or if you have a fault, if you have something that people will notice, will they notice it at 5 meters? Will they notice it at 5 feet? Or will they notice it at 5 centimeters? Right? And that is, if you are 5 centimeters away from someone, and I can still look at them and go, hey, you know what? Your patch is wrong because it's doing the wrong thing. It's a pretty big flaw. It's a big enough flaw that from a distance people will notice. Now, you may not care, it may not be important to you. If I can come up to 5 feet or so and go, oh yeah, you got a little thing here that's not quite right. It's obviously a lot less noticeable. It's something that, again, a lot of people might even miss. And if I have to actually get up to 5 centimeters before I realize that something is different, then essentially, is there actually a problem? Because you're not going to have a lot of people doing that, hopefully. But then again, you never know.
There's different grades of people in the prop world. Any of you that are into any kind of cosplay, you know that some people get really nitpicky about stuff. Other people just want to go and have fun and look somewhat like the character.
Yeah.
So depending on how involved you are and how much time and money you want to spend, you can go all out and 100%. There's no such thing as 100% accuracy. I don't care who you are, what you're making.
Unless you have the actual
the one that
original
came from
prop.
the movie, it's not 100% accurate.
To put it in a different kind of aspect, when you think about it, you look at us with all our gear and everything else, and people who know the movie or whatnot will take a real, like wow, and look at it and say, those look amazing, those look great. Out of the 2 years that we've been together and whatnot, I don't think we've had anyone really say anything about our packs and say this is wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong. But at the same point, there's another company that is called the Ruby's Costumes, and basically the costume is just a really like a yellow little skimpy flight suit, and it's an actual blow-up proton pack and gun. Okay? Inflatable, yeah. And we've been to events, like we've been at Fan Expo and other events where these people have come in with just the $40, $50 Ruby's costumes and have gotten as much attention as what we have with all of our gear. So,
That just goes to show you how much the general public just is excited to see a Ghostbusters.
Exactly.
It's all about having fun. If those guys have fun doing that, hey, power to them, because that's what it's all about.
We were at Fan Expo last year, and there was a guy with the slime blower that shot Silly String, and everybody was like, oh, this is the greatest thing.
And he opened up the top and he had water bottles in there.
There's a
It was
cooler on the
great.
inside of the slime.
It worked out.
Yeah. I mean, that's just an example of how clever you can get with this if you have the know-how, if you have the expertise, and if you have the support group. If you have a group of people who are willing to give you ideas like that, because not everybody's going to think of taking off the top of the slime blower and having a cooler inside of there. But once you hear that, don't you think that's a good idea? Don't you think that's something that if and when you do one, I think I'm putting a cooler in there. Alright, so we've got about 15 minutes left, and this is the part I was basically going to have Q&A. I was going to open this up to any questions you guys might have, any questions you'd want to ask, and just fire away.
I have a question. Have you ever tried to take this stuff across the border to the US?
Not yet.
No, but I have heard of people that have and had no problem.
They've had no problem.
No.
I think as long as it's taken all together, I mean, as long as you have the uniform and the equipment and all that, and it's like in a single place.
And you're willing to explain what it is.
And you're saying, and if they stop you and you say, well, I'm going to a convention, or I'm doing this, that, and the
As long as
other.
you're not trying to sneak it in.
No, because
Yeah, I mean,
if you're not allowed to ship that and you've recreated it,
That's just
pretty
because it's
close.
mil spec. That's the only reason. That's
So,
not
but
any restriction on it.
some border guard may not know the difference.
Yeah. And there's chances are somebody could ship one of those from the US with no problems, and it could come across.
Yeah, yeah.
And it just happens that if customs does open it, that guy's in big trouble.
The best thing that I've always heard, because I've looked into ideas like where people are shipping things, or if people are traveling and they have any kind of equipment that they're bringing, like any kind of prop stuff, the best thing to do is to actually have a picture of the prop and where it's been used. So like there'd be a picture in the movie, like the cover of the Ghostbusters, you could do that, and a picture of the proton pack on their back, right? And if that's accompanied, then they have, you know, some people might look at it and say, what is this, a bomb or a jet pack? Or
exactly, yeah, it looks like it could be a weapon.
If
sort
you
of
had
thing.
a ticket, I'm going to Dragon Con in Atlanta, this is my gear.
Yeah. And here's the proof from what film it is. This is
We live in actually a very good time for that, because conventions are getting more and more popular, more and more mainstream attention.
Yeah.
So if you're saying, I'm going to Comic-Con in San Diego, most people now know what that is.
Yeah.
And then they will go, okay, I see where you're going. Okay, that makes a lot more sense now. Versus, 20 years ago, and saying, I'm going to whatever, a Star Trek convention, people will be going, what the hell is a convention for Star Trek, and why is this happening? And,
That's true. Would you fly with that, or would you like drive if you had to go somewhere? Or
if I put a
you
jetpack
really
in
don't
it, I could fly with it.
No, I mean, like if you were going to go across the border, would you?
I'd probably drive it over.
You'd
I think the shipping costs and the weight would be way off.
Oh,
man.
okay.
Some people have actually, because there's actual military luggage cases that people have made so that their proton pack will fit in. They just get the foam and they cut it to the spec, and it actually fits right in. And people have done that, and they've shipped that. I've heard a lot of people where if they're going over, like if they're going to Dragon Con or something like that from a different place, they'll actually like FedEx and mail it to themselves somewhere, and then they'll fly and they'll just meet it there and pick it up. So.
But then it could get stuck in customs and delayed when you're at the con.
Yeah, weird stuff. Yeah, the safest thing, like I would never ship mine anywhere. I'd always pick on me.
Especially the more complicated it gets. I mean,
No,
you got electronics in there, you don't necessarily want it being poked and bumped and jostled, because God forbid something comes loose, right?
Yeah.
Like on average, you're looking anywhere from between, on the low end, $500, on the high end, $2,000 for a proton pack. Depending on if you have lights, the salad, everything else, what parts are used. So it's a lot of money to just stick on an airplane, hopefully.
You, sir, have a very great trust in the Postal Service.
Any other questions?
What is the between the 500 and the 2,000? What is the actual build time?
Well, again, it depends on what materials you're using. Like if
And,
you're going to scratch build as opposed to pre-made shell, that cuts down a lot of time.
And a little bit on how versatile you are, or how versatile whoever you hire to do it is. If you have someone who does this, semi for a living, I would say they could probably do it in a month or less.
Okay, so to reword, how long did yours take?
Well,
A month or less.
see, I didn't have anything. I was actually, when I decided I was going to, Ghostbusters has been a passion my entire life. When I decided that, I was like, that's it, I'm getting home. I was actually in Australia at the time doing my teacher's college. And I said to myself, okay, my graduation gift to myself is my Ghostbusters uniform. I'm ordering everything. I did a month of actual reviewing it and research on everything. And then I found like the different forum boards and everything, and call in, and I found all the guys from Ontario here that are actually doing it and that have access to all this kind of stuff. So what I started doing when I was in Australia is I knew shipping times and everything. I was buying all the parts that I needed, all the things that people were saying that you should do, the best things to do. Because like me, myself, I wasn't going to turn around and start making molds and actually building the stuff and woodworking and all that kind of stuff. So I had to look for, like a shell and a motherboard and all the parts that were going to work together with each other. So that's where all the research and reviewing went. Like, but electrical and stuff like that, like the light boards and all that kind of stuff I bought. But I wired everything together. Like I knew I'd be able to assemble everything without any trouble, because my friend and I actually do car stereos and we do fiberglass work and everything. So if there was anything that needed to be fixed, I knew there'd be no problems. So within that month period, I started ordering all my stuff. When I got home, pretty much everything was already home waiting for me here back up north. I'm actually from Sudbury. I started building everything from the uniform to all the stuff on the belt to the pack and everything else. I started, it was near the end of May. And I was finished. I worked pretty much full time. Every day I was working on stuff. And I had 2 uniforms on the go, all the stuff on the belt, the pack, everything. I finished probably by about July, beginning of July. And again, we had a couple other conventions and stuff, and like I was borrowing some Collins equipment for those conventions that we were doing, like those little get-togethers. But to have all my stuff actually completed, painted, put together, and so it was, you know, working at it pretty steady every day. It took me about, you know, 2 months, a good month.
Power source packs. You mentioned 9 volt as an example. Is it just a battery with 9 volts in there, or do you have?
I have a 12 volt, and I mean, when you know what to do, you could have even a series of 12 volts hooked up. I wouldn't recommend that because that's a lot of juice that you don't necessarily need. But 12 volts tend to be a standard thing, especially if you're going to put sound in, because that will power a fair size amp, as well as the 15 LEDs that you are going to be lighting, right? Now LEDs don't generally draw a lot of power, especially from a big enough battery, but it all adds up, right? And you're going to want to have something that will last that. Now, whenever you're buying a battery, they will have something on it that says amp hours, and that is the effective running time of whatever battery you have. So if you have a 5 amp hour battery, you can expect roughly 5 hours of use before it needs to be charged or replaced.
That's continual use.
But that's continual use, and starting and stopping will actually draw more juice per length of time than just holding
So
it
turn
on.
on, leave it on, it's much better than,
If you're going to turn it on and leave it on for a little bit, that's fine, but if you're always going,
yeah.
you're going to draw eventually a lot more juice. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to last, you know, die in a day, unless you're always doing this, and once you get it, you may always be doing this just to hear it turn on and off, but it still drains.
With a lot of lights too, like you're not going to, like when we do outside events during the day, we barely ever have, you're not going to see
Yeah,
it, right?
it's like I said with the LEDs. In here, it looks all right. It's bright enough, but outside in bright sunshine, you can hardly tell it's on.
And even outside too, with a lot of the soundboards that are out there, somebody will say, yeah, you got sound, but you've got to be like right up to it because the sound is just, and there's too much, you know, noise coming in.
Especially if it's a loud event, there's a lot of things going on. Like yesterday at the Rip Fest we were at, there were bands playing and people yelling and screaming left and right. And
Like even
some guy
mine
says,
here.
okay, like turn on your pack. I want to hear your sound.
So okay, like in
Can hear
here, right? If we fire it up, you guys can hear that, right? Okay, and then even if we intensify, okay, right? Now outside, that's not going to do anything.
Yeah.
And I've got 2 speakers in this.
That's without an amp.
And this is without an amp, that's
I
right,
see.
I'm without an amp, okay? Now he said 12 volt battery. You've only got one.
I'm running on 1.9 volt for both,
1.9.
but after a day, it's toasted.
Done.
It's toasted.
What
There's
is
no
I have
time
a
on it.
12 volt and another 6 volt for the speaker and the amps, and I have an actual B battery. So I have all 3 of those.
It also depends on the soundboard you get, right?
Yeah.
Some are the boards you get, period. Some will all work together on one. Some are a little bit more piecemeal or from earlier times. And basically how you want to run it, what you want to run, and how big you want to go with it, right? Yeah.
One of the issues with Ghostbusters sound and light kits in particular is there's really no set manufacturer out there that builds their stuff to be compatible with other people, so you've
Yeah.
always got little connectivity issues.
It goes back to that electronics kit thing I said earlier, how they like to leave just enough that you have to work a little. They also like to make sure that their gear is going to be readily compatible with anyone else's.
And guys come and go. It seems like a guy's making one kit for a while and then he disappears. And then you find a soundboard that goes with it, and then somebody else comes along and the soundboard doesn't work with that one.
Yeah.
So there's all compatibility, just like stereo equipment, computer
Yeah.
equipment, there's always compatibility stuff with it.
That's another reason why when you're getting into it, and if you guys do anything else, the research I find was such a big deal for me, because you want to order from the people that have been around for the longest time. Because these guys, these fly-by-night guys that show up and say, oh, I can offer this for cheaper and everything else, and if you have anything that's wrong, all of a sudden they're gone. They're nowhere to be near, or they, you know, they don't
Crazy
even
Joe's
involve-
discounts proton packs.
Yeah, you know,
Yeah, I
like,
don't know if you guys do any surfing on the internet of Ghostbuster sites or not, but there are a few good sites out there who have feedback forums on them, so you can go in and say, look at the forums and see who not to buy from more importantly.
Yeah.
Because there are a lot of
Because-
shady people out there.
People will mention it, especially if they get bad service or they get bad stuff. People will go out there and say, my God, this was a horrendous experience from start to finish. Don't anybody do this, because I know, brother. We are actually about 2 minutes from time.
Yeah.
I want to thank you all for coming in. It was great. I had fun. If you have any more questions, obviously, just come by and ask. I mean, you can always ask about outside the forum of this little cubicle.
And you can go to ontarioghostbusters.ca and contact us from there if you have a question or if you want to join up.
If you guys wanted a card, we have some.
Not one of us remember that. That's all we've got. All right, thank you.
Thank you.